Chapter 5. Where are you, my guardian angel? The chronicle of my life story took me back to my childhood. My reminiscences continued up to the point where I was playing in the sand with the country kids, and then broke off. At that moment, my soul was overwhelmed with an inexplicable sense of alarm. Not a single event in my whole life aroused positive emotions or feelings comparable to those I experienced that morning after spending the night with Anastasia, or with those that arose in me after she brought the rhythms of the surrounding nature in tune with the beating of my heart. I described this experience in chapter Touching Paradise. But I consider these marvelous feelings to be something created in me by Anastasia. They weren't my own. They were artificial, a gift from Anastasia. Involuntarily, I compared them with those of my previous life, and found no analogy whatsoever. Again and again I hunted down recollections of my life, as though running a movie reel, backward and forward. Everything I saw was related to my efforts to get or achieve something. Sure, I got what I wanted, one thing after another, but there was no great feeling of satisfaction. Instead, some new desire merely appeared. In the most recent years of my life, when those around me thought how splendidly everything was turning out for me, aroused an even greater feeling of confusion and chaos. The cars I had acquired, the women, the banquets, the gifts and congratulations I had received, all seemed empty and pointless. I quickly got to my feet and said, with some irritation, either to myself or to Anastasia, "There are none of these healing sensations in man's life, at least not in mine, and I would say there are many lives where they can't be found." Anastasia also rose to her feet and calmly observed, "Then you should create them as quickly as possible." "What do I need to create? Tell me, what?" "First, you must understand what holds the greatest meaning or significance for you. You have just been looking over your past life, but even with the opportunity to analyze it, to look at it objectively, as it were, you still were not able to notice what was really significant. You kept latching on to the usual values, as you saw them. Tell me the situations where you felt you came closest to a sense of happiness." "There were 2 situations, but each time something prevented me from feeling truly happy in them." "What kind of situations?" "Back in the early days of Perestroika, I managed to acquire a long-term lease on a steamship. This was the best passenger ship in the Western Siberian River Fleet, the Mikhail Kalinin. After the lease agreement was drawn up, I went to the harbor, and there she stood. What a beauty! I remember the first time I stood on the deck of my very own ship." "And did your feelings of happiness greatly increase when you stood on the deck?" "You know, Anastasia, our lives are filled with all sorts of problems. As soon as I had climbed aboard, I was met by the captain. We went to his cabin and had a bottle of champagne together. During our conversation, the captain advised that all the water pipes needed cleaning at once, or the health authorities would not allow us to set sail. And there were other things he told me. And so, Vladimir, you immersed yourself in all the problems and cares involved in running of the ship." "Yes, that's right. There were a lot of them." "It is inherent in the nature of artificially created matter and various mechanical devices, Vladimir, that they bring more problems than pleasures. Their benefit to man is quite illusory." "Well, I don't happen to agree. Maybe in themselves these mechanical devices have problems. They need constant repair and maintenance. Still, they help us get a lot of things." "What, for example?" "Even love. Genuine love, Vladimir, could not possibly be under the control of artificially created objects. Even if you owned all the objects in the world, you would not be able, just with their help, to gain access to the true love of even one woman." "Well, you simply don't know our women. You're spinning theories, that's all. I managed to get it." "What did you manage to get?" "Love. I quite simply succeeded. There was one woman I loved a great deal. I loved her for many years, but she didn't really want to go off with me anywhere alone. When I got my ship, however, I invited her aboard, and she accepted. Can you imagine how great that was? Here we were, sitting alone at the ship's bar. There was champagne, first-class wine, candlelight, music, and nobody else around. Here we were alone in the empty bar on my ship. She was the only one there with me. I had the ship set sail without taking on any passengers, just so we could be alone. The ship proceeded down the river. There was music playing in the bar. I invited her to dance. Her figure was fantastic, especially her breasts. I hugged her tight. My heart was pounding for joy, and I kissed her on the lips. She didn't run away. She even hugged me back. Do you see? There she was, right beside me, and I could touch her and kiss her. All this was because of the ship, and you say it can only bring problems. And then, Vladimir, what happened? Nothing much. Please try to remember anyway. I tell you, it was nothing important. Can I tell you what happened there on the ship between you and that young woman? You can try. You had a lot to drink. You made a deliberate effort to drink as much as possible. Then you put your keys to your cabin in your luxury apartment on the table in front of her, and you yourself went down to the lower decks. You slept almost 24 hours in the cramped crew's quarters. And do you know why? Why? The moment came when you noticed a strange expression on the face of that beloved young woman of yours, a preoccupied smile. Intuitively, even subconsciously, you realized that she, your beloved, was thinking how happy she would be if only it were her own beloved that was sitting across from her in this bar instead of Megré. Your precious girl was dreaming of someone else, someone she really liked. She fantasized that it was he and not you who was the master of the ship. You were at the mercy of inert matter, to which you had tied your living feelings and aspirations and were choking them to death. Don't go on, Anastasia, I pleaded. These recollections aren't happy ones for me. In any case, the ship did play its role. It was thanks to the ship that you and I met. The happenings of the present are the results of the previous feelings and impulses of the soul, and it is only they that determine the future. And it is only their momentum, only the beating of their wings, that is clearly reflected in the heavenly mirrors. And only their impulses and aspirations will be reflected in happenings here on the earth. What do you mean by that? I asked in some bewilderment. Our meeting may well be the culmination of many aspirations of the soul on both your part and mine, perhaps on the part of our immediate or even more distant forebears. Perhaps it came from a single impulse of the cherry tree growing in the garden of your country home, only not the ship. What has the cherry tree in my garden got to do with it? In all your many glances back at your life, you failed to pay any attention to this cherry tree and your feelings connected with it. Yet those feelings have played a leading role in your life in recent years. The universe did not react to your ship. Just think, what could a primitive, run-down material device, incapable of either thinking or restoring itself, possibly mean to the universe? But the cherry tree, a little Siberian cherry tree which you could not even make room for in your recollections, excited the cosmic expanses and changed the course of time and history, and not only yours and mine, because it is a living being, and like all living beings, it has an inseparable connection with creation as a whole. Chapter 6. The Cherry Tree. Remember, Vladimir, everything you associated with this little tree. Remember starting right from the moment you first made contact with it. I shall try to remember if you think it's important. Yes, it is important. I was riding in my car. I don't remember where I was going. We stopped near the central market. I asked my driver to get out and buy some fruit. I stayed in the car and watched people leaving the market carrying all sorts of saplings. You watched them and were surprised. Why? You see, their faces were happy and contented, even though it was cold and rainy out. Here they were hauling away some kind of saplings with their roots all bound in cloth. These saplings were heavy to carry, but the people's faces were content. And here I was, sitting in my warm car, and I was sad. When the driver returned, I got out and went to the market myself. I kept walking up and down past the merchants' stalls and bought 3 cherry saplings. As I was tossing them into the baggage compartment, the driver said that one of the saplings wouldn't survive, since its roots had been cut too short, and I had better throw it out right off. But I decided to keep it. It was the most graceful of the three. Then I went and planted the saplings in the garden of my country home. I threw an extra topsoil around the tree with the short roots, and a sprinkling of peat moss, along with a bit of fertilizer. In trying to help it, you burnt 2 more little roots of the sapling with the fertilizer, Anastasia added. But it survived. In the spring, when the buds started coming out on the trees, its branches came to life too. Little leaves began to appear. Then I set out on my commercial expedition. But before that, Anastasia observed, every day for a period of more than 2 months you would drive out to your country house, and the first thing you did was go and see how the little tree was getting on. Sometimes you stroked its branches, you were so happy to see the leaves, and kept watering the tree. You drove a stake in the ground and fastened the trunk to it with twine all around so the wind wouldn't break it off. Tell me, Vladimir, do you think that plants react to people's attitude toward them? Do you think they feel good and bad thoughts? I've heard or read somewhere that houseplants and flowers do react that way. They can even become all withered when their caregiver goes away. I've heard about scientific experiments where they attach sensors to various plants, and the needles jumped one way when the plants were approached aggressively, and the other way when someone approached them with thoughts of gentleness and kindness. So, Vladimir, you know about plants reacting to the expression of human feelings, and, according to the Grand Creator's design, they strive to do all within their power, all that they can to meet man's needs. They bring forth fruit and try to arouse positive emotions in man with their flowers, beautiful and fair. Indeed, they put oxygen into the air so that we can breathe. But plants have been granted yet another function which is no less important. Plants, which come into direct contact with an individual man, create for him a space of true love. The kind of love without which life for the human race would be impossible. Many dachniks are in a hurry to get out to their plots because it is there that such a space has been created for them. And this little Siberian cherry tree you thought to plant, the one you cared for yourself, it tried to do the same as all the other plants and perform its assigned function. If there are a lot of them, plants can create a man's significant space of love. If they are of different varieties, and man communicates with them and approaches them with love, altogether, plants can create for man a significant space of love which enhances the soul and makes the body whole. You see, Vladimir, altogether, when there are a lot of them, but you looked after just one sapling, and so this one little Siberian cherry tree began aspiring to do what only a number of plants acting together can do. Its aspiration was aroused by your special relation to it. It was something you yourself realized only intuitively. In all your surroundings, only this one little tree was not asking anything of you. It was not being hypocritical, it only aspired to give of itself. And then you came along. You were tired after a busy day. You went over to the tree, stood, and pondered. You looked at it, and it responded. Before the first ray of dawn appeared in its perfection, the leaves of the tree tried to catch that ray's reflection in the brightening sky. And when the sun went down afar, it tried using the light of a bright star. And it persisted. Something transpired. By and by, just a wee bit of something transpired. Its roots, twisting themselves around the burning fertilizer, were able to take in what they required from the earth. And the earth's juices began turning and running through the veins of the little tree a little more quickly than usual. And then, one day, in an early morning hour, you came and saw the little flowers to which the tree's delicate branches had given birth. The other saplings were devoid of flowers, but this one, thanks to your gift of caring, had already blossomed. You were overjoyed, your spirits were uplifted, and then, do you remember what you did, Vladimir, after seeing the flowers? I really was overjoyed. For some reason, my mood was on a high. I felt a lightness in my head. I went and stroked its branches with my hands. You gently stroked its branches, and you said, "Well now, my beauty, you've blossomed. You see the trees, Vladimir, and you see the leaves, and the fruit born thereof. But more than that, the trees create a space of love. The little cherry tree very much wanted you to have this space. But where was the place for the tree to find the strength to give back to man what it had received from him? It had tried and had already given everything that was in its power, but it had received something extraordinary besides, a showing of tenderness towards itself and the flowers it bore. And then it had the desire to do more, all by itself. You went off on your very long expedition, and then, completing your journey and returning, the first thing you did was go to the garden plot and see your little cherry tree. But along the way, you were eating cherries you had bought at the market. As you approached it, you noticed that there were 3 red cherries growing on your tree. You stood there beside it, all tired out, eating the bought cherries and spitting out the stones. Then you tore one of the cherries off your tree and tried it. Indeed, it was just a little bit more sour, a little less sweet than the market cherries you had decided to eat, and you did not touch the other 2. I had had my fill of the other cherries, and this one was indeed more sour. Oh, if only you had known, Vladimir, how much power those little cherries contained on their own that was so beneficial to you, how much energy and love. From the depths of the earth and the expanses of the universe and more, the tree had gathered everything helpful for you and poured it into these 3 cherries. It had even let one of its branches wither in order to make these 3 cherries ripen. One of them you tried, but you left the other 2 on the tree to die. I had no idea, but still I was happy that it was capable of bearing fruit. Yes, you were happy. And then, do you remember what you did this time? Me? Well, I stroked the tree's branches some more. And you not only stroked them, you even bent over and kissed the leaves on the branch which was resting on the palm of your hand. Yes, I did, because I was in such a good mood. And something incredible happened with the tree. What more could it do for you, since you had not taken the fruit thereof that had been grown with so much love? What could it do? It trembled from the kiss of man, and thought and feelings inherent only in man but produced by this little Siberian cherry tree took flight into the universe's space of light, to give back to man what it had received from him, to give back to man its kiss of love, to warm him with this, the bright feelings, the space of love. And against all laws that thought swept across the universe but could not find a resting place, a means of manifesting the breath, the life of itself. Knowing that one cannot find a resting place means death. Then the forces of light returned to the cherry tree, the bright thought it had produced, so that it might destroy the thought within itself and not perish. But the tree did not pick it up. The little Siberian cherry tree's burning desire endured, unchanged, extraordinarily pure and trembling. The forces of light did not know what to do. The grand Creator was not about to change the established laws of harmony for you. But the cherry tree did not perish. It managed to endure because the thought, aspiration, and feelings thereof were extraordinarily pure. And by the laws that constitute creation as a whole, nothing can destroy pure love. And it circled over your soul and dreamt of finding a resting place, a place to thrive. Alone in the universe, it was striving, aspiring to create for you a space of love. It came to your ship at least to try to be of some help, and fulfill the cherry tree's desire to find this resting place, to manifest its love. Even though I did not know to whom it was addressed. Anastasia paused. You mean to say, I queried, that your relationship to me arose out of your desire to help the tree? My relationship to you, Vladimir, is simply that, my relationship. It is difficult to say who was helping whom here, the cherry tree me, or I the tree. Everything in the universe is interrelated. To perceive what is really going on in the universe, one only need to look into one's self. But now, by your leave, I am giving an embodiment to this, to what the cherry tree desired. May I give you a kiss from the tree? Of course you may, since it's the right thing to do, and when I get home I shall eat all its fruit. Anastasia closed her eyes. She pressed her hands to her breast and quietly whispered, "Feel this, little tree. I know you can feel it. I shall now do what you wished. This will really be your kiss, little tree." Then Anastasia quickly placed her hands on my shoulders, and without opening her eyes, drew near, touched her lips to my cheek, and held them there. It was a strange kiss, just the touch of her lips, but it was not like any I had ever received before. It aroused an extraordinarily pleasing sensation, one I had never felt up to now. The technique of moving the lips or tongue or body probably had nothing to do with it. What counted, most probably, was what was hidden in the inner man that was manifesting itself in the kiss. But what was hidden inside this tiger recluse? Where did she get so much knowledge from, and so many unusual abilities and feelings? Or maybe everything she said was simply the product of her imagination. But then, where did she get such extraordinarily tender, charming, and heartwarming sensations come from? The ones I could most certainly feel within me. Perhaps our joint efforts will manage to unravel the mystery through the aid of the following situation, which I had the good fortune to witness. Chapter 7. Who's to blame? Once when Anastasia was trying to explain something to me about lifestyles and faith, but couldn't find suitable understandable words, which she no doubt very much wanted to find, a curious incident took place. Anastasia quickly turned to face the ringing cedar, pressing the palms of her hands against its trunk. But then something inexplicable began happening to her. Lifting up her head and addressing either the cedar or someone way up high, all at once she started speaking passionately and with concentrated attention in a combination of words and sounds. She was evidently trying to show or explain something, or plead for something. From time to time her monologue seemed to be infused with tones of persistent demanding. The resonant ring of the cedar increased in volume. Its ray became brighter and thicker. And then Anastasia demanded sharply, "Answer me! Answer! Explain! Give it to me! Give it to me!" she said, shaking her head and even stamping her bare feet. All at once the pale glow of the ringing cedar's tree-top became focused into a ray, and the ray suddenly broke off from the cedar and flew upward and dissolved into thin air. But at this point another ray appeared, coming down to the cedar from above. It seemed to consist of a bluish mist or cloud. The needles of the cedar, pointing downward, were illuminated with similar misty rays, almost unnoticeable. And these rays pointed toward Anastasia, but didn't touch her. They seemed to disappear and dissolve in the air. And when she insistently stamped her feet, and even slapped the ringing cedar's huge trunk with the palms of her hands, the glowing needles began stirring, and their rays joined to form a single ray of bluish mist. It aimed itself downward toward Anastasia, but didn't touch her. The ray dissolved in the air, literally dissolved, at about a meter away from Anastasia at first, then at just half that distance. I suddenly recalled with horror how Anastasia's parents had perished, very likely from just such a ray. Anastasia continued her stubborn pleading and demanding, much like a spoilt child insisting on some desired favor from its parents. And suddenly the ray made a dash for her, as it were, illuminating her whole body like a flashbulb. A cloud first formed around Anastasia, and then began dissipating ever so slowly. The ray from the cedar dissolved. The rays from the needles were extinguished. The cloud around Anastasia continued to dissipate. It was either entering into her or dissolving into space. Now radiant with a joyous smile, she turned and took a step in my direction. Then she stopped and began staring past me at something beyond. I turned around to see Anastasia's grandfather and great-grandfather coming into the glade. The tall, gray-bearded great-grandfather walked slowly, just ahead of his son. He was leaning on a stick that looked something like a shepherd's staff. Upon reaching my position, he stopped and fixed his gaze on me, as though staring into empty space. I couldn't even tell whether he actually saw me or not.
Great-grandfather stood silently for a moment. Then, after bowing ever so slightly, without uttering so much as a word of greeting, he headed over to Anastasia. Even though grandfather was a bit of a fuss-budget, he was a very simple man. His whole demeanor pointed to a most kind and cheerful fellow. As he approached the spot where I was standing, he at once stopped and offered me a simple shake of his hand. He started to say something, but I can't recollect exactly what he said. For some reason, both of us felt our attention and concern suddenly drawn to what was going on at the base of the cedar. Great-grandfather had stopped just a meter from Anastasia. They stood there for a while, silently staring at each other. Anastasia was standing before the bearded old man, her hands lowered to a vertical position, as though she were a schoolgirl or university applicant being confronted by a strict examiner. She looked like a child caught being naughty, and her anxiety was most evident. The tense silence which had come over the scene was broken by the deep, clear, velvety tones of great-grandfather's voice. He did not say hello to Anastasia, but proceeded at once to a stern questioning, every word slowly and distinctly pronounced. Who can make an appeal directly to him without going through the light and rhythm that have been bestowed upon us? Whereupon Anastasia responded without hesitation, any man can make an appeal to him. From time immemorial, he himself has taken great pleasure in talking with man, and this is what he wills right now. Are all paths outlined by him in advance? Great-grandfather continued. Are there many earth-dwellers capable of discerning them? Are you capable of seeing these paths? Yes, I have seen what has been outlined for mankind. I have seen how future events are dependent on the conscious awareness of those who are living today. Have his sons and their enlightened followers, who have perceived his spirit, done enough to bring enlightenment to those living in the flesh? They have done and are doing everything, not even taking thought for their own life. They have borne witness to the truth and are still bearing witness. Can one who has seen the truth have any doubt about his intellect, kindness, and magnificence of spirit? He has no equals. He is one. But he does wish to communicate. He wants people to understand and love him as he loves. In communicating with him, is it permissible to be insolent and demanding? He has given a particle of his spirit and mind to everyone living on earth. And if a small particle, his particle, in man, does not agree with what is generally accepted, that means he, and I mean he, is not satisfied with everything as it has been outlined for the future. He is reflecting on it. Could one term his reflections insolence? Who is permitted to hasten the pace of his reflections? Only the one who gives permission. And just what are you asking for? I am asking how to give understanding to those who do not understand, how to inculcate feeling in those who do not feel. Has the lot of those who fail to perceive truth been determined? The lot of those who fail to perceive truth has been determined. But who is to blame for the lack of acceptance of truth? The one who does not accept the truth, or the one from whom he receives it? What? You mean you? Great-grandfather said in agitation, and then fell silent. He stood silently for a while, looking at Anastasia. Then, with the help of his staff-like cane, he got down on one knee and took Anastasia's hand. Inclining his silvery gray head toward her, he kissed her hand and said, "Hello, Anastasia." Anastasia herself at once knelt down before her great-grandfather and exclaimed with excitement and surprise, "What do you mean, grandkins? Treating me like a child. I'm grown up now." Then she put her arms around his shoulders, snuggled her head against his beard-covered chest, and held still. I knew she was listening to his heartbeat. That was something she had loved ever since her childhood. The oldster continued kneeling, one hand resting on his cane, the other stroking Anastasia's golden hair. Grandfather got excited and rushed over to his father and granddaughter, who were both still kneeling. He began strutting around them, throwing up his arms in some bewilderment. Then, all of a sudden, he too got down on his knees and embraced them both. Grandfather was the first to rise to his feet. He then helped his father up. Great-grandfather was still staring intently at Anastasia. Then he slowly turned around and started walking off. Grandfather, in the meantime, started muttering away, though it wasn't clear whether he was addressing anyone in particular. All the same, they're all spoiling her. Even he spoils her. Dear me, just look at where she's got to. She pokes her nose in wherever she feels like it. There's nobody to teach her a lesson. Who will now help the Dachniks? Who, I say? Great-grandfather stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around and said distinctly in his deep, velvety voice, "Granddaughter dear, follow the dictates of your heart and soul. I myself shall help you with the Dachniks." Turning away once again, the majestic grey-beard started on his way out of the glade. "Do you see what I mean? They're all spoiling her," Grandfather broke in again. Picking up a short switch, he strutted over to Anastasia. Waving the switch about his head, he threatened, "I'm going to teach her a lesson right now." "Oh, oh!" Anastasia threw up her hands in feigned fright. Then she gave a laugh and ran off, trying to elude her pursuing grandfather. "So she's even taken it to her head to run away from me. As if I couldn't catch up," he muttered under his breath. With unaccustomed ease and speed, he intensified his pursuit. Anastasia ran laughing, weaving her way across the glade, and while grandfather did not relax his pace, he was still unable to catch up to her. Suddenly, grandfather gasped and sat down, grasping his leg. Anastasia quickly turned about, her face full of concern. She ran over to her grandfather and held out her hand to him, and all at once she stopped. Her infectious peals of laughter filled the glade. I paid particular attention to her grandfather's pose and realized the source of her mirth. Grandfather was squatting down on one leg, holding his other leg out in front, not touching the ground. And here he was stroking the very leg he was squatting on, as though it had been injured. He had outsmarted Anastasia, but she was not deceived. As it turned out later, she was supposed to have noticed right off the comic discrepancy in his pose. While Anastasia was laughing, grandfather managed to seize her by the arm. He raised his switch and gave her a light spanking like a child. Anastasia squealed, trying to pretend it was painful, and in spite of the endless laughter she was trying so hard to restrain, grandfather put his arms around her shoulders and said, "All right, that's enough. Don't cry. You've learned your lesson. You've got what was coming to you. You'll be more obedient in the future. Listen, I've started training the eagle. It may be old, but it's still strong and remembers many things. And here she is, insolently poking her nose into everything. Grandpakins, my dear sweet Grandpakins, the eagle, that means you already know about the baby? The star, don't forget." Anastasia didn't let her grandfather finish. Putting her arms around his waist, she lifted him off the ground and spun him around. When she returned him safely to the ground, grandfather staggered a bit and said, trying to appear strict, "So, that's the way you treat your elders. You see what I mean? You're spoilt." And continuing to wave the switch, he hurried to catch up with his father. As he reached the trees at the edge of the glade, Anastasia called after him, "Thank you, Grandpakins, for the eagle. Thank you very much." Grandfather turned around and looked at her. "Only just be, my dear child, please remember to be more—" His voice was too gentle. Breaking off his sentence, he added with a bit more severity, "Watch out, or else," as he disappeared into the forest.